Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video. Today, or now, we're going to be showing you my league starter for 3.12 Heist League. It's gonna be fun. I was very disappointed in a lot of things. Hex Blast, for example. This was the last build I wanted to go into and do, but the idea got scrapped, and I will do something I can trust because there's too many question marks around how we're going to make the Hex Blast build work. So I'm just going to make sure that we get to play the game and see how it works in game before I make a build out of it, but I will definitely be doing it. And I don't want to start with skeletons, even though that once we get the skeleton sword, we're most likely doing a skeleton build because that looks fucking broken. And I wanted to start replacing salvo, but there's a couple of question marks in how the projectile behaves when you're shooting them close to you versus shooting them far away in terms of visual looks, but also where the projectiles will land, and that in combination with how it would look with totems or even mines. So I kind of scrapped starting with those, and since I know that I'm going to do a skeleton build once we get the sword, I wanted to do witch so I could easily do the transition. So my league starter for 3.12 is none other than a Dark Pact build. Now, Dark Pact build could, in last league, we reached a bit over 100 million Shaper DPS. I have adjusted the high budget PvP a little bit. However, gear pieces like this, with a fractured tier 1 spell damage, with high cast speed, high crit multi, +1 spell, +1 minion, stuff like this is going to be very, very, very hard to achieve. So I wanted to look into a low budget state and look at what we would achieve in a more realistic manner in a low budget situation. Now, the Dark Pact build is surviving quite efficiently with Immortal Ambition, which you can get from the Glorious Vanity, Timeless Jewel, or in a low budget state, you use the simple Soul Tether. So with the Soul Tether, we are looking at this one to get the Immortal Ambition. The low budget state would use a Gloomfang, which should be very cheap, and the Soul Tether here is edited for the chain damage to display how much damage the chain would do when you're playing this build. The Cherubim can be changed for pretty much any type of chest piece. It's not very important. And you would go for one cluster jewel to get Blessed Rebirth. And since you don't really have to get the extra node, it doesn't matter if you get a super bad early game cluster jewel with max amount of passives, as you just need to get the Blessed Rebirth. You don't have to go for it. I took the 6 nodes that would force me to spend another point to get there, which is actually pretty okay because minion scaling HP for the skeletons will mean that you do more damage. And then obviously hulking corpses. So something like this would actually be very cheap to achieve. And you most likely will only be focusing on Blessed Rebirth, which you can alteration craft first if you find or purchase a base one, until you can purchase a better one for the later stage. The build is having a 75% block chance with 72% on spell block, and probably a little bit lower depending on the roll on your Roomish Concoction. On the other hand, you don't need a max roll on the attack blocks because you're getting that from Spec and Arcane Swiftness, and we're also picking up Command of Steel through the oiling. So the attack roll on the Roomies don't need to be perfect, but the spell one you would prefer to have that as high as possible. That's also why we're speccing into Mystic Bulwark. Other than that, the build is super straightforward. I was contemplating removing the Throat Seeker because I could only bring the crit up to about 68% with this, and that's including 2 extra power charges. So I'm a little bit hesitant in the way that will work. So there's a couple of differences with the 3.12 compared to previous leagues, and that is the fact that the Curse on Hit ring has been screwing us over with the changes there, which was, in my opinion, the biggest nerf to builds or anything in the patch notes for 3.12, where Curse on Hit is now a mark on hit. When it comes to these specific curses, Assassin's Mark is a mark curse, and it would only be applied to rare or unique enemies, and that kind of fucking sucks. This forces us to use something like, if I can find it, power charge on crit or storms, and I am using specters, and since we are specking into death attunement as well as a natural strength, we're actually going to be able to fairly easily get ourselves up to level 25 specters so that we can, in a better gear, reach 4 specters. With 4 specters, you can have 2 generating power charges and 2 generating frenzy charges, link them with blood magic and spell echo, so that when they cast, you get 4 charges of each kind, and the frenzy charge will then be capped at 3, but your power charge will be up to 8 or 9 seconds later when they cast it again, so that you can get your max cap of power charge without using this. However, this is still something that I would go for early on to get the charges up on the first pack, and then you should be fine. The Curse on Hit would still be there though, so you can use the Assassin's Mark on hit versus bosses. Other than that, the gear is pretty straightforward. Life Res, if you can get some Chaos Damage Leech, that's great. Gloomfang gives you some Chaos Damage Leech, that's perfect, and that extra chain. The boots, just movement speed on life, unless you can get the pair of Elder ones that gives you that extra level of Spectre Gems. The gloves, just life and res. Whatever you can benchcraft, increase damage while leeching, it's perfect, such as on gloves or amulet if you have a rare one. The helmet, I only took a bone helmet with the +3 level of minion gems, which is a level 86 one though. So you might want to start with something a little bit lower than that, like +2 level of minion gems, till you can get in item level 86 one, and then just craft it yourself if you want to. On the other hand, getting this on a non-bone helmet version is not a problem. That should be very easy. The ones just high spell crit with a little bit of crit multi and spell damage, any of these modifiers can be bench crafted, like 90% plus to crits, bench craft to crit multi, or bench craft to spell damage, and you would achieve something like this, and this is super cheap to achieve. The main one I have there, this would be, I'd argue, for the more expensive item on this gear display we have, and this is a spell damage with crits to spells, as well as plus level of all spell skills or minion skills, with a trigger craft. This will be the only big one, so to say, to automate those bone offerings. So with this in mind, we're in a situation where with absolute trash gear, we only get about 68% crit, but we're still doing 8.5, almost 8.6 million Shaper DPS with this build. Very high sustainability, very high EHP, as we're sitting on 4,000 HP with another 1,700 energy shield, and this is consistently leeching to you at any given time, thanks to the chaos damage leech's life. And it's just straightforward, and you can very easily go from this one into the high budget build. Obviously there will be links in the descriptions below to this rough draft of a low budget PUB and the video guide for my high budget version that I've shown in the past as well. So that's basically it. It's very straightforward. But like I mentioned, the cluster jewel, some people do mention that it can be expensive to craft this. You just want to focus on having Blessed Rebirth first. So if you buy a baseline medium cluster jewel with minion life, you alteration craft Blessed Rebirth, and you're done. And I do believe personally that Blessed Rebirth will be at, when you get into the medium stage of mapping, like yellow maps, Blessed Rebirth will become mandatory. But prior to that, it's fine to play without. It's comfortable if you have it, but it's not mandatory. But at the higher end content, you're gonna want to have a Blessed Rebirth to make sure you actually get time to do damage. That's when Blessed Rebirth becomes mandatory. But at that point, purchasing a base jewel like this, or even dropping it and then just alteration crafting it yourself, is not a problem. So this makes this build a very solid league start. However, it does, because it's very important to note that a build like this will require Soul Tether to work, or the Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel. So getting a Soul Tether early on is very crucial. So with that in mind, if you league start with this, be a little bit careful with how you plan out your defense and how you play the game till you can afford or purchase that Soul Tether, which usually isn't that expensive, like 10-15 C in the early stage of the game, at least on the first 10 to 20 hours of a league. Shouldn't be a problem to achieve, but this is the only mandatory one to look for. Everything else can pretty much be self-found. Play with a rare amulet till you can get a Gloomfang. Play with a rare chest, like your Tabula Rasa for that matter, till you get your Cherubim or something else. In the high budget version, however, the chest piece will be a little bit different, because the body armor has been harvest crafted to get all of these modifiers. We will, in a high budget state, skip the explosion, and we will skip the additional curse, and simply woke orb the power charge on crit together with the spells have critical strike chance to achieve those two most important statistics to help our crit numbers goes up, which is the big difference between the high budget versus the low budget approach. You can still use Gloomfang if you want to, but when it goes to the high budget version, I personally prefer to get a little bit less damage and get a little bit more HP from my amulet myself. It's a matter of personal taste. That's about it. That's all I have to say. It's a very solid build, and yeah, we definitely will be doing some hex blasting. We're going to be doing some blazing salvos and cracking lance. There's going to be a lot of builds, including a skeleton build coming up in the league in the coming weeks, and I'll try to get them out as soon as I can for you boys. But it's going to be fun to league start with Dark Pact, because I've never actually league started with this ability, so it's going to be very fun to level with it, because I'll be using Dark Pact from start to finish. Alright, that's all I got for you with this video. Hope you guys have a good league start on the coming Friday 3.12. Until next time, boys, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Stay safe and keep rocking.